For Heidegger, it is care. Concern is another word that could be used here. The German is Sorge, S-O-R-G-E. Care is what Heidegger interprets as what is fundamental to the being of Dasein. You can look at what people construct, what they build, what they make, what they cherish. And this is supposed to be, and I think it's not an unreasonable interpretation of human being. In terms of the future, we are always, according to Heidegger, ahead of ourselves. In a certain way, what our plans and projects are not a part of our future, but a part of our present. The mood that he thinks that reveals what Dasein really is anxiety. That is the mood that will reveal, as it were, the formal, existential character of Dasein is anxiety. Anxiety. Now, when I say mood here, you could easily misunderstand me. All the account Heidegger is giving, while it's a story about the human self, this account of the mood of anxiety I'm about to give you briefly is not the kind of anxiety for which you run to the doctor or the psychiatrist and you take a Valium or talk it out or get on a damn 12-step program, because it is an anxiety before the fear of nothingness. It's an anxiety in the face of death. He examines the mood of anxiety then, not as a mere mood that just comes upon you once in a while, but as an underlying structure of what it means to be human. In other words, if you remove this anxiety, you would also remove the self. The same view Kierkegaard holds of despair. I mean, we're not depressing people here. We're not trying to depress people, but these are structures of the selves. These aren't symptoms that Phil Donahue or Oprah Winfrey can fix. To be asked to be cured of your fundamental despair, your anxiety, is to ask to be cured of what little self you may have. It is a stupid thing to even want, in a way, because it is our anxiety that makes us look at how we came up from the past. The way that that's described by Heidegger is that we were abandoned to the they, to das Mann, the crowd. What does he mean by that? Well, he means we grew up in a place like West Texas or Cleveland, Ohio, or Bangladesh, where the way we grew up and the way our past is structured, we didn't learn our moral theories from Kant or Mill. We learned them because our mamas spanked our butts, said, don't steal, whap. You know, we were thrown into that. We were abandoned to those values, as it were. It's not a scary thing. That's how we learn. You're abandoned to the they. And the reason I like that phrase, the they, is you're all familiar with remarks like, well, they say. Well, that's exactly the spirit in which Heidegger's using the concept here. You know, if you violate certain restrictions of your culture, somebody's going to go, well, but you know, they say that. Well, that's the way in which Heidegger sees us relating to our past. Anxiety reveals that to us. Now, why is it anxiety? Well, if we want to make our lives a project, and Heidegger thinks fundamentally we do, thinks that's part of the structure of Dasein, is to want to make your story a story. A story. Not just a bunch of disconnected junk and debris that happened to you, but a story, a project. If that's true, then our relation to the past is filled with anxiety, because we all started from this moment or from this time of abandonment to the values of others, to they. It's not an evil thing. This just means the culture around you, means the opinion of people. Well, you know, they say that you know, you're wearing your hair like that, it's just, and so on. I mean, it's not unusual stuff. This is the common way in which we're brought up. Anxiety reveals our present state as a fleeing away from. Now, this is where Heidegger brings in the way in which that we try to fill our life up with busyness. Well, what are we fleeing away from or falling away from? Heidegger thinks until we face nothingness, our own nothingness, that we tend to fill our lives with busyness. We flee into this and flee into that. We fall away from our own best insights about what we should be doing, and so on. Anxiety would reveal about the future if you can free yourself from the they to a certain extent. You can't completely. And if you can stop fleeing from the present and trying to live in it, you can see why this account was popular in the 60s, right? You remember beatniks used to like Heidegger. Okay, well, this is why. You try to live in the present. If you try to do that, the future will begin to look like a project, which Heidegger characterized as being free for and from. Being free for your projects and being free from your sort of attempt to get away from yourself. Okay? And someone during break mentioned this to me. I think it's true. Being free in this sense is not an easy thing to want to be. Let me just say that right away. I mean, being free from the they is already a problem for most folks, right? I mean, how many people want to live, you know, in Bainbridge Drive and have the only red, white, and blue house? I mean, even that tiny little transgression could make some people into a nervous wreck. No, I mean, sure, some people are afraid of death and other people are afraid of being seen carrying People magazine. I mean, we live in a society that may be far too superficial for the account I'm giving, so I'm hoping to try to make some sense out of it. I mean, different things bother different people. I'm going to realize that I will die, and then I will choose an authentic project and carry it out. And I will free as many constraints as I can from the they. I will stop fleeing from myself. He even has a word in here for what he would probably call this lecture, which is chatter. You know, I'm going to free myself from the chatter of every day and talk deep thoughts in the Black Forest. With Heidegger, we choose a project in full awareness that being is always being towards death. For Heidegger, this doesn't cripple our action, but it makes us see that just like if we wanted to write a beautiful poem, we would plan an incredibly grand last stanza or whatever. When we choose a project, we want to choose one that will make of our life a complete thing, a thing with meaning, a connected story, a story worth telling. So that's the idea, is that the recognition of one's own nothingness in one's own death is the ultimate possibility. This recognition and acceptance frees us for our projects. It allows us, for one thing, to engage in a bit of what I consider, if you wanted to sum up the wisdom of the East, you know, Oriental wisdom in just one sentence, it might be something like, don't sweat the small stuff. I mean, there was a real well-known Buddhist who told me I could sum up the Tao and the Gita and all that for you quickly. It's this: don't sweat the small stuff. You Westerners, you spend all your time sweating the small stuff. Heidegger here says, look, if you really internalize as a part of your self-story the knowledge that you too will be dead, gone, nothing, that will be a freeing and liberating experience. But you have to be able to, like, work through it, as it were, to use a psychoanalytic phrase, to work through it. Well, what does it allow us to escape from? Well, I actually have to say that this moment in existentialism has certainly been good for me, I think. Just been a healthy thing for me. It cut short therapy. I went to a therapist once. I went 3 times. And on the 3rd visit, I went, oh, by the way, I have a question. Why are we born to suffer and die? And she went, that was the end of therapy for me. I figured that if she couldn't help me with, like, my fundamental problem, she wasn't going to do much good on the trivial problems. I mean, you know, I had a big problem. Why are we born to suffer and die? She just went, I mean, you know, she said, well, I could write you prescriptions for some Valium. And I said, no, thanks. I drink. Don't need it. I belong to a large club. I'm a drunkard. No, anyway. What it does is this. It makes you, for me, it's made it easier to talk to groups, to teach classes and to talk to groups of students and not to be afraid of cameras and stuff like that because, I mean, in the end, we're all dead. In the end, Johnny Carson, his body will, like, you know, turn into dust. In the end, the earth will shrivel up like a cinder and fall into the sun. I'm going to feel free to engage in my project without worrying about what they told me about how I should do philosophy. So I think there's a moment of truth or a moment of interest in Heidegger's account. Also, it's made me rather short and sharp with small talk. It really does. I mean, it makes me where people go, oh, gee, you know, the weather today is just, you know. I mean, I'm sorry, but I prefer conversations about sex, religion, politics, of course, being a man, sports. But if it's not something, you know, grabs me, I feel perfectly free to go, well, let's chatter. I haven't got time for it. Be dead soon. Can't do it. But we have a culture now where the most obvious example of fleeing from death is this utter obsession with being young until it's obscenely too late for it. Until this is fleeing from yourself in such a way that it's madness. Who wants to be the world's best-looking 111-year-old person? I mean, what is the point in that, for God's sakes? I just, you know, this is something that I don't follow. I mean, my grandfather was a good man. He died at 78. I think that's good luck and plenty long enough. In a way, it's fleeing from death. And what I'd like to say about it is this. You could eat all the tofu you want and jog as long as you like. And compared to geologic time, your life's going to be gone like that anyway. Geologic time's a long time. And you can jog your butt off and you're still going to die. That's what I like about death. It's democratic. It would irritate me if you could jog and live forever and I got to, you know, got stuck here smoking and having a good time and died over it. No, you'll die too, you know. You'll have 34 more years to run up and down the Stairmaster. Now, what in the world could be a better example of Heidegger's account of fleeing from our authentic projects than to imagine some poor sap who spends 3 hours a day running up and down just stairs that are just... In what kind of culture? This is my question to you. Is there a human self left in a culture that produces people who run in place for hours doing nothing? Is there any reason to talk about humans like that? What it sort of steers you away from, this fleeing business, this Stairmaster business, to make it a very contemporary example, is an authentic life. I mean, this is, for Heidegger, what you want to achieve. You don't want you want to achieve a life with authenticity. And this is the key word for him. An authentic life is one in which you don't flee from your destiny, but one in which you shape it as far as you can. And Heidegger's no romantic about it. He knows that you'll be given certain historical conditions to deal with, limitations that belong to all humans, but authentic life is one in which you try as best you can to make your life, at least, something worth talking about in the same sentence with the word destiny. And I think my example of the Stairmaster, if you go, compare that to to Odysseus, you know, I mean, that's a pretty far gap for civilization to move, isn't it? From Odysseus, you know, who goes from island to island and then comes home, kills a bunch of people, takes his wife back. Big story. Killed a Cyclops and made fun of gods and did all these tricky, wonderful things that belong to our Western past, and I think it is interesting. But I bet Odysseus wouldn't have had time to do that if he'd stayed in shape about 4 hours a day on that Stairmaster. Just wouldn't have worked out for him. In any case, this project is one to try to get away from empty conformity and to live authentically.